Welcome, dear brave listener. You're tuning in to Careful TV, and I'm truly grateful you're here. Whether you're tuning in during the day or late at night, thank you for choosing to spend a part of your time with me. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and means more than you know. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, what brought you here, or even what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Your support keeps this channel going, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Now, let's get into today's horror story. I've lived in Sacramento, California my entire life. It's not perfect, but it's always felt predictable. Quiet streets, polite neighbors, a rhythm that rarely changes. The kind of city that people pass through without noticing. A place that doesn't end up on the evening news unless there's a county fair or a high school team wins a championship. I think that's why it rattled me so much, because what happened that night didn't feel like something that belonged here. It was a Friday evening in mid-October. School had been dragging all week, and all three of us, Emily, Matt, and I, were exhausted. We needed a break from cafeteria food and the stress of upcoming midterms. So we stopped at the KFC on 16th Street. It wasn't far from our school, right near the edge of the downtown stretch. We'd been there dozens of times. The booths were a little sticky, the lights a little too bright, but it was familiar. We ordered our usual and settled into a booth near the window. Outside, the last light of day stretched thin across the pavement. The air had that dry chill that clings to October evenings, the kind that makes you pull your hoodie tighter and walk a little faster. We were halfway through laughing at one of Matt's dumb impressions when the door swung open and an older man stepped inside. He looked to be in his late 60s, maybe older. Heavy coat, worn jeans, a crutch tucked under one arm. His movements were deliberate, like each step required thought, and that southern drawl, deep, slow, almost too practiced, rolled off his tongue when he spoke. He asked if we could help him, said he needed to cross the street to get to Walgreens. Something about picking up a prescription and having trouble with his leg. At first, it just seemed like a genuine request from someone down on their luck. He looked weathered, tired, maybe lonely. His eyes didn't exactly meet ours, but there was something in his voice that felt rehearsed. I didn't notice that at first. I was too focused on being helpful. My name's Olivia, and I've always had a hard time saying no, especially to people who seem like they're struggling. Before Emily or Matt could say anything, I volunteered. Emily shot me a quick look, her eyes narrowing just slightly, but she didn't argue. Matt just shrugged. We all knew how I was, so I stood up and followed him toward the door. That's when it began to shift. As soon as we stepped outside, I noticed his pace pick up. Not by much, but enough to register. The way he carried himself didn't match the way he'd acted inside. The limp he had before was barely visible now. The crutch, which had seemed like a necessity moments earlier, suddenly felt more like a prop. We started walking slowly toward the intersection. He started talking again, more than before, asking about school, our schedules, what we like to do after class, where we lived, if we worked. He even asked about Emily and Matt, how long we'd known each other. There was something odd about the way he phrased things, like he was trying to gather information without making it too obvious. I answered some of his questions, but I kept things vague. It wasn't until we reached the curb just before the crosswalk that I noticed how close he'd gotten, inches away. Too close. I could smell tobacco on his breath. Not fresh, more like it had soaked into his jacket, like it had been lingering for years. The light was red. We paused. That's when I felt his hand on my arm. Not rough, not gentle, just firm, intentional. I froze. My first instinct was to pull away, but I hesitated. Part of me still wanted to believe he was just old and needed support, that maybe I was overreacting, but my gut, the part of me I often ignored, was screaming. The light turned green. We crossed. He let go, just like that. We reached the other side and I exhaled. Emily turned back and asked if we were still heading to Walgreens. Before I could respond, he looked at me and said, "Actually, I forgot. I need to stop by the library. It's just a few blocks past here. Won't take long." His tone was casual, friendly even, but my insides twisted. I hesitated. I glanced at Emily and Matt, who were now a little ahead of us. I didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to seem paranoid, So I nodded, even as every part of me resisted. We continued walking. The street we were on was quiet. Businesses were closing up. The wind picked up, stirring dry leaves across the sidewalk. The sun was nearly gone now, casting everything in gold and shadow. He kept talking, asking if I had siblings, if my parents worked nearby, what classes I liked best. At some point, I stopped answering in full sentences, just yeah and not really and nervous laughs. I kept glancing around, hoping to see someone nearby. But the streets had emptied, he noticed. "You seem nervous," he said. "Don't be, I'm harmless. Just need someone to talk to." I nodded, forcing a polite smile, but the words didn't help. In fact, they made it worse. Something about how he emphasized harmless, like he was trying too hard to convince me, or himself. As we turned the corner onto 14th Street, a group of people walked toward us. Their laughter echoed down the street. For a moment, I felt relief, actual physical relief, like I could finally breathe. He slowed down. I saw his posture shift, less upright, more withdrawn. He looked down, angled his body slightly away, like he didn't want to be noticed, like he didn't want them to see us together. I glanced at Emily and Matt again. They had stopped and were watching us, concern etched on their faces now. The group passed. Their noise faded. He picked up pace again. We reached the front of the library. He stopped and turned toward me. No smile this time, no friendly tone. "Thank you, Olivia," he said, his voice deeper, slower. "I think I can manage from here." I nodded quickly and took a step back. But before I could turn, he reached out and grabbed my arm, tighter than before. My heart skipped. I tried to pull away, but his grip was solid. He wasn't looking at me anymore, just holding on, like he was thinking about something, like he was weighing a decision. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat tightened. Then I heard it. Emily's voice, sharp. "Olivia?" That snapped him out of it. He released me. I stumbled back. Matt was already closing the distance, his face tight with concern. The man just smiled. "Just saying goodbye," he said quietly, and then he walked away, calmly, like nothing had happened. He disappeared into the soft traffic and fading crowd near the corner. Just another coat in a city of coats. I stood there frozen. Emily placed a hand on my back. Matt kept watching the direction the man had gone, his jaw clenched. On the way back to KFC, none of us spoke for a long time. Eventually, we told one of the workers what had happened. She looked rattled, said others had complained before. Same description, same crutch, same smile, always hovering near the Walgreens or down by the bus stop. Never enough to get arrested, but always enough to leave people shaken. "He comes around sometimes," she said. "We've reported him, but he always disappears before anyone can talk to him. It's like he knows." Back in the car, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying every moment. The way he touched my arm. The shift in his voice, the pressure in his gaze. I remembered every word he said and every question that felt too personal. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I stared at my ceiling in the dark, wondering how close I'd really been to something going wrong. Wondering what would have happened if Emily hadn't spoken up, if Matt hadn't walked over, if that group of strangers hadn't passed us on 14th Street. In the days that followed, I felt different. I was quieter, more cautious. I stopped walking alone, even in broad daylight. I started listening to my instincts more, even when it meant being impolite. It wasn't fear exactly, not anymore. It was something else, something sharper. Awareness. The old man hadn't hurt me, but he'd reminded me that danger doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it walks right up to you, asks for help, and smiles, and I'd let it happen because I didn't want to be rude. Now, every time I pass that KFC, I glance at the crosswalk. I think about the crutch, the coat, the way he said my name like it was his to use. I don't know who he really was or what he really wanted, but I know this. The scariest part of that night wasn't what happened. It was realizing how close I came to something I'd never be able to undo. And that haunts me more than anything. The fluorescent lights in the break room flickered with that particular kind of institutional exhaustion that comes from years of overtime shifts and corporate neglect. I sat there staring at my reflection in the black coffee, wondering how I had gotten myself into this mess again. 3 years at this KFC in Sacramento, and I thought I had seen everything the fast food industry could throw at me. My name is Sarah, and I have been managing late night shifts since I was 22. Now, at 26, I should have known better than to trust the kind of person who shows up at your workplace unannounced, claiming they are just trying to help. But desperation makes you stupid, and we were desperate. The trouble started when our district manager, Janet, disappeared without notice. One day she was there, doing inventory checks and lecturing us about food costs. The next day, her office was cleared out, and corporate was sending automated emails about restructuring. That left me running a skeleton crew during the busiest hours, trying to keep our location from falling apart while dealing with the usual cast of drunk college kids and third shift workers looking for cheap food. For 2 months, I held that place together with nothing but spite and caffeine. My assistant manager, Carlos, had quit the week after Janet left, citing personal reasons that everyone knew meant he had found something better. The overnight crew dwindled from 5 people to 3, then to just me, and whoever I could convince to stay past midnight. I was pulling 16-hour days, covering shifts that should have been split between 4 managers, and slowly watching my sanity erode like sugar in rain. Corporate finally sent help in the form of Rebecca Torres, a regional supervisor who had been managing a location in Stockton. She arrived with 2 of her people and immediately started making changes. Rebecca was probably in her early 40s, with the kind of aggressive efficiency that comes from years of dealing with corporate bureaucracy. She wore her authority like armor, speaking in clipped sentences and making decisions without consultation. The first thing she did was institute what she called proper closing procedures. This meant deep cleaning every surface, reorganizing the walk-in cooler, and completing paperwork that had been optional under Janet's management. The work itself was not unreasonable, but Rebecca's timing was. She expected everything done by 2 a.m., regardless of how busy we had been during the dinner rush. Initially, I tried to explain our situation. The Sacramento KFC served a different demographic than her Stockton store. We had more late-night traffic, more complex orders, and a smaller staff. Rebecca listened with the kind of patience that barely concealed irritation, then told me that excuses don't improve profit margins. Her approach with the remaining crew was even more problematic. These were people who had stuck with me through the worst period in the store's history, working mandatory overtime and covering shifts for absent coworkers. They deserved respect, not lectures about accountability and performance standards. Within a week, Rebecca had managed to alienate everyone who had helped keep the place running. The breaking point came during a particularly brutal Friday night. We had been slammed from 6 p.m. until well past midnight, with a line of customers that stretched to the parking lot and a drive-through backup that blocked traffic. I was running register, managing the drive-through headset, and trying to coordinate with the kitchen when Rebecca decided this was the perfect time to discuss my leadership deficiencies. She cornered me near the soda machine, speaking in that loud whisper that is somehow more aggressive than shouting. According to Rebecca, I was too familiar with the staff. I did not command respect, and my casual management style was the reason we were behind on closing duties. All of this while customers waited and my crew struggled to keep up with orders. I had reached my limit. 3 months of holding everything together, of sacrificing my sleep and sanity for a company that barely acknowledged my existence. And now this woman was telling me I was not doing enough. I told her exactly what I thought of her management philosophy, using words that would have made my grandmother wash my mouth out with soap. Rebecca's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on a shade of red that matched the spicy sauce bottles. She informed me that my attitude problem would be addressed through proper channels, which I interpreted as corporate HR getting involved. I had been through enough disciplinary procedures to know how that would end. The next morning, I put in my 2 weeks' notice. I had already been interviewing at other places, and a different KFC location in Roseville had offered me a management position with better hours and actual staff support. The decision should have been easy, but leaving felt like admitting defeat. I had invested 3 years of my life in that KFC, and walking away meant abandoning the crew who had stuck with me through everything. My last 2 weeks were tense but uneventful. Rebecca made it clear that my presence was temporary and unwelcome, while I tried to transition my responsibilities without completely abandoning the remaining staff. By the time I cleaned out my locker and turned in my keys, I was exhausted but optimistic about the future. The new KFC job was everything I had hoped for: better pay, reasonable hours, and a management structure that actually functioned. I worked mostly day shifts, which meant I could have something resembling a normal social life for the first time in years. The staff was professional, the equipment worked, and I went home at reasonable hours instead of stumbling through my apartment at 3 a.m. About a month into the new job, I started noticing things. Small things at first. A gray Honda Civic that seemed to appear in our parking lot during my shifts, always parked in the same spot near the dumpster. The driver never came inside, never ordered food, just sat there for hours at a time. I mentioned it to my assistant manager, thinking it might be someone dealing drugs or using our parking lot for personal business. The car showed up 3 or 4 times a week, always during my shifts, always in the same spot. I started paying more attention, trying to get a better look at the driver, but the windows were tinted and the angle made it impossible to see clearly. It bothered me in a way I could not articulate, like finding a single sock in your laundry that does not belong to you. The situation escalated on a Tuesday night in late October. I was working a closing shift, something I had volunteered for to help with scheduling, when the Honda appeared again. This time, instead of just sitting there, the driver got out and walked around the building. I watched through the window as a figure in a dark jacket circled the restaurant, stopping occasionally to look through windows or examine the employee entrance. My crew was busy with closing duties, so I stepped outside to confront whoever was prowling around our building. By the time I reached the parking lot, the person was already back in the car, engine running. I approached cautiously, trying to get a better look at the driver, but the car pulled away as soon as I got within 20 feet. The next day, I called the police to report suspicious activity. The officer who took my statement was polite, but clearly uninterested. Someone sitting in a parking lot was not illegal, and walking around a building was not necessarily threatening. He suggested I call back if the person actually did something criminal, which was about as helpful as it sounds. Thursday night, the Honda was back. This time, I had my phone ready and managed to get a partial license plate number before the car drove off. I also noticed something else. The driver was wearing a KFC uniform shirt. The revelation hit me like ice water in the face. Rebecca had been watching me, tracking my schedule, learning my routines. The realization transformed the entire situation from mildly annoying to genuinely frightening. This was not some random person with boundary issues. This was someone who knew where I worked, when I worked, and probably where I lived. Someone who had access to my personal information through corporate databases and enough authority to justify almost any behavior. I spent the next few days looking over my shoulder, checking my rearview mirror, and jumping at shadows. Every customer who came through our door got scrutinized. Every car in the parking lot became a potential threat. The paranoia was exhausting, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, studied, cataloged. The final confrontation came on a Friday night that I will never forget. I was leaving work around 11 p.m., later than usual because we had been training a new crew member. The parking lot was mostly empty, just my car and the Honda Civic parked in its usual spot. As I walked toward my vehicle, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find Rebecca standing about 10 feet away, still wearing her KFC uniform, but looking disheveled in a way that suggested she had been sitting in her car for hours. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, and she had that particular kind of exhaustion that comes from not sleeping properly. She started talking before I could react, rambling about how she had been checking on my progress and wanted to discuss my career development. The words came fast and disjointed, like she had been rehearsing this conversation but could not remember the script. She mentioned specific details about my work schedule, my break times, even the route I took home. I backed toward my car, keys already in hand, while Rebecca continued her monologue. She seemed genuinely convinced that her behavior was normal, that showing up at my workplace uninvited was somehow appropriate professional conduct. The disconnect between her words and her actions was terrifying in its completeness. When I told her to leave me alone and threatened to call the police, her demeanor changed instantly. The fake friendliness disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. She reminded me that she had connections throughout the district, that she could make things difficult for me if I overreacted to her friendly concern. I got in my car and drove straight to the police station. This time, the officer took my complaint seriously. Having a former supervisor follow you to a new job and lurk in parking lots crossed several legal lines, regardless of her stated intentions. They agreed to have a conversation with Rebecca about appropriate boundaries. I never saw her again after that night. The Honda Civic stopped appearing in our parking lot, and my former coworkers at the old KFC told me she had been transferred to a different district. The whole experience left me with a paranoia that took months to fade, and a healthy skepticism about people who claim their inappropriate behavior is motivated by professional concern. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not stood up for myself that night. How long would Rebecca have continued her surveillance? What did she hope to accomplish? The questions bother me more than the fear did, because they suggest a level of calculated obsession that makes random violence seem almost preferable. The fast food industry attracts all kinds of people, but most of them are just trying to make a living. Rebecca was something else entirely, someone who had confused authority with ownership, who had interpreted workplace conflict as personal betrayal. She had turned a simple employment dispute into something that felt like stalking, and I am grateful I recognized the danger before it escalated further. I still work in food service, but I am more careful now about who I trust and what information I share. The experience taught me that workplace harassment can follow you home, that professional relationships can become personal obsessions, and that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who convince themselves they are trying to help you. Well, I never thought I would have a story worth telling about fast food, but there is this one night that still makes my skin crawl whenever I drive past a KFC. It was not supernatural or anything like that, just people being weird in a way that made every instinct I had scream at me to get out. This happened about 2 years ago, in November 2023, in Bakersfield, California. I am Sarah, and I was 24 at the time, working as a night shift nurse at Mercy Hospital. My boyfriend Marcus, who was 26 and worked construction, had been putting in 14-hour days all week trying to finish a project before the holidays. We had been together for 3 years, and I knew when he was running on empty. That particular Thursday, I got off work at 11:30 p.m., completely drained from a shift that had been nonstop chaos. Marcus had texted me around 10, saying he was finally heading home and asking if I wanted to grab food somewhere. The only places open that late were fast food joints, and honestly, after 12 hours of hospital food and vending machine snacks, even KFC sounded like heaven. There was a KFC on Truxton Avenue that stayed open until midnight on weekdays. I had been there a few times during normal hours, nothing special, just your typical franchise location in a strip mall between a nail salon and a check cashing place. The parking lot was decent sized, well lit, and it was on a busy street, so it felt safe enough. Marcus met me there around 11:45. He looked as tired as I felt, with concrete dust still on his work boots and that particular exhaustion that comes from physical labor. We decided to eat inside since the drive-through line had 3 cars and we were both too tired to sit in the car waiting. The place was almost empty when we walked in. There was an older man, maybe in his 60s, sitting alone in a corner booth with a newspaper spread out in front of him. He had clearly been there a while. His food containers were empty, and he had that settled-in look of someone who was not planning to leave anytime soon. The only employee visible was a young guy behind the counter, probably 19 or 20, with bleached hair and multiple ear piercings. His name tag said Tyler. Tyler was friendly enough when we ordered 2 family meals because we were both starving and figured we would have leftovers for lunch the next day. He seemed normal, maybe a little chatty for someone working the late shift, but nothing that set off any alarms. He told us it would be about 10 minutes since they were making fresh chicken, which was actually reassuring. We found a booth near the front windows where we could see the parking lot. The restaurant had that familiar KFC smell mixed with industrial cleaning products, and the fluorescent lights gave everything that slightly harsh late-night quality. Marcus was scrolling through his phone, and I was just zoning out, watching the occasional car drive by on Truxton Avenue. That's when I started noticing things that felt off. First, the older man in the corner had not moved at all since we had arrived. Not to use the bathroom, not to throw away his trash, not even to adjust his position. He was just sitting there, staring at his newspaper. But I never saw him actually reading it. His eyes weren't moving across the page the way they should when someone is reading. He was just staring. Then Tyler came out from behind the counter to wipe down tables that were already clean. He started with the ones closest to the kitchen, which made sense, but then he worked his way toward us, spending way too much time on each table. When he got to the booth right next to ours, he was wiping the same spot over and over, clearly listening to our conversation. Marcus was telling me about some drama with his foreman. Nothing personal or sensitive, just work stuff. But Tyler was hanging on every word, nodding along like he was part of the conversation. When Marcus noticed and gave him a questioning look, Tyler quickly moved to the next table. "That's weird," Marcus said quietly. "Yeah," I agreed, but I was trying to convince myself it was just boredom. Working alone on a late shift, maybe the guy was just desperate for human interaction. Our food came out about 15 minutes later. Tyler brought it to our table instead of calling our number, which wasn't necessarily strange, but he lingered after setting down our trays. He asked how our day was, if we lived nearby, what we did for work. Normal small talk, but there was something about the way he was asking that felt less like friendliness and more like he was gathering information. Marcus answered politely but briefly, clearly wanting to eat and go home. Tyler eventually got the hint and walked away, but he didn't go back behind the counter. Instead, he sat down in a booth across the restaurant where he had a clear view of us. That's when my nursing instincts kicked in. In the ER, you develop a pretty good sense for when someone's behavior is off, and Tyler's behavior was definitely off. He wasn't playing on his phone or reading or doing anything to pass the time. He was just watching us eat. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I think we should take this to go." He looked up from his chicken. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. Something feels weird about this place." Marcus glanced around, taking in Tyler's stare and the old man's continued statue-like pose. "Yeah, okay, let's get out of here." We started packing up our food, and that's when Tyler stood up and walked over to us again. "Everything okay?" he asked, but his tone had changed. It was less friendly customer service and more urgent, like he was genuinely concerned about us leaving. "Yeah, we're just tired," Marcus said. "Long day. You sure you don't want to finish eating here? It's really cold outside." It wasn't particularly cold. It was November in Bakersfield, maybe 55 degrees, not cold enough to justify his concern. "We're fine," I said, continuing to pack up our food. That's when Tyler did something that made my blood run cold. He looked over at the old man in the corner and nodded. Just a quick, subtle nod, but it was clearly some kind of signal. The old man immediately folded his newspaper and stood up. For someone who had been sitting motionless for at least 30 minutes, he moved with surprising speed and agility. He walked directly to the front door and just stood there, not leaving, not coming back in, just standing by the door. "What is he doing?" Marcus asked, his voice tense. "I don't know," I said, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there immediately. Tyler was still hovering by our table, and now he was actively trying to slow us down. He kept asking questions, offering to get us extra napkins, suggesting we try the new dessert menu. Meanwhile, the old man remained stationed by the door. "We need to leave," I whispered to Marcus. "Now." Marcus nodded. He had seen enough weird behavior in his construction work. People on drugs, people having mental health crises, people who were just plain dangerous, to recognize when a situation was going sideways. We stood up with our bags of food and started walking toward the door. Tyler followed us, still talking, still trying to delay us. The old man stepped aside to let us pass, but he didn't leave. He just watched us walk out. In the parking lot, I felt a momentary relief. We were outside, we had our car, we could just drive away. But as we were getting into Marcus's truck, I looked back at the restaurant. Tyler was standing at the window, watching us. The old man was still by the door, also watching us. And here's the part that still gives me chills. There was a third person now. A woman, maybe in her 40s, had appeared from somewhere in the back of the restaurant. She was standing behind Tyler, also staring out at us. "Drive," I said. "Drive now." Marcus started the truck and we pulled out of the parking lot. As we drove away, I looked back and saw all three of them still standing there watching us leave. "What the hell was that about?" Marcus asked. "I have no idea, but I'm glad we left." We drove to a different part of town and ate our food in the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart under the bright security lights with plenty of other people around. The food was good, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly avoided something really bad. I found out later, through a friend who worked at the hospital, that there had been a string of robberies in that area around the same time. The pattern was always the same. People would be approached in parking lots late at night by multiple attackers who seemed to know when victims would be alone and vulnerable. The police suspected the perpetrators were getting information from employees at businesses in the area. I don't know if that's what was happening at the KFC that night. So maybe Tyler was just a lonely kid working a boring job and the old man was just some regular customer who liked to hang out at restaurants. Maybe the woman in the back was just another employee I hadn't noticed before. But my gut told me we were being set up for something, and I'm glad we listened to it. In nursing, we have a saying, trust your instincts, because they're usually right. That night, my instincts were screaming at me to get out of there, and I'm grateful we did. I've never been back to that KFC. I drive past it sometimes on my way to work, and it looks normal enough during the day. But I will never forget the way those three people watched us leave, like they were disappointed we had figured out their game. Sometimes the most dangerous situations are the ones that start out feeling almost normal. It's not always obvious when you're in danger. Sometimes it's just a feeling, a series of small things that don't quite add up, a voice in your head telling you to trust your instincts and get out while you can. That night, we listened to that voice, and I'm pretty sure it saved us from something we really didn't want to find out about. And that's all for today's Careful TV horror stories. Thank you so much for listening. It means the world to me that you chose to spend your time here, and I truly hope you enjoyed the stories. Before we go, I want to take a moment to show appreciation to some incredible listeners whose kind words and encouragement have truly meant a lot. I've read your messages, and your support continues to inspire me to bring better and better stories with each upload. You are a part of this journey, and I'm grateful to have you here. First, a big thank you to Christine Allen at Christine Allen RS6HM. Your words truly lifted my spirits. Next, Scully Pop, thank you for your continued presence and thoughtful support. To Sean Miller 229, I've seen your comments and they've meant so much. Thank you for being here. To Mahidi Hassan C7G4B, your kind messages never go unnoticed. I appreciate you. To Uncle Hollow NX P08Y, thank you for being a part of this growing community. To Nello's Nook 4454, your support has been a quiet but powerful force. Thank you so much. To Zuri Smooth at Zuri Smooth, your engagement always brings warmth. I'm truly grateful. And finally, to Krishna Ghosh at Krishna Ghosh 21 thank you for your kind words and for being part of this journey. Each of you and so many others play a part in the heart of this channel. Your presence reminds me why I continue doing this, and I truly hope you won't miss what's coming next. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the shadows.